My name is Katie Giddings, and I will be your facilitator today. Bradley Wright is there, who is going to be our presenter today for this subject, this exciting hot topic, right, Brad?
That's right.
All right, so what do we have so far? Affordable housing is a key part of the table's advocacy efforts and a major concern for folks we work with. Yes, awesome, Ramsey. Thank you. And Tracy says, to clarify questions that arise from the affordable housing policies in the Perth official plan. Gail says, seeing a variety of housing types that people can afford. Yeah. Ben says, here. Awesome. So we might have more people that keep joining, but why don't we get started with our topic for today? And I'll just turn it over to Brad. And then also I would love to just have the town of Perth, all of the members that are sitting there, if we can also just have a little sense of who is there and present with us today. Let's turn it over to the town of Perth first. Good
afternoon, Gary Waterfield, citizen member of the Planning Advisory Committee.
Do you want to give us a wave so we see which of this? There you go. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Judy Brown. I am a member of council and the chair of the Planning Advisory Committee.
Hi, Judy.
Leona Cameron, councillor and member of the Planning Committee.
Hey, Leona. Is there anyone to your right, Leona?
No.
Okay, cool. Perfect. So Brad is going to introduce our topic for today. And I see that some people have written in the chat, and if you would like to write what interests you in this topic today, so affordable housing, what is your interest? What is your, interest in being here with us today? And as usual, today we're going to have a presentation by Brad, or little explanation. What is affordable housing? What does that look like? What's the context? We'll have time for questions, and then we'll do a short breakout and then have some space for discussion as well. Anything you want to say before we get started, Brad?
Nope.
Okay. Well, let me get your presentation shared and ready to go.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. We're trying to discuss this issue today of affordable housing. So every month we've been working on a different topic of the official plan. And so today is affordable housing. We'll go through just a brief presentation. I am by no means an expert in affordable housing, but as a planner, I have a pretty keen interest in trying to find solutions for the affordable housing crisis that we have. And it's not just the town of Perth, it's also a county issue, provincial issue, and a national issue that everyone's trying to work with. So I think, as one summary I could provide is that we do need more housing. We need more diversity of housing options, and we need more affordable housing. And I think it's going to take a team effort from the municipality, from the public, and from not-for-profit organizations, as well as looking for funding from the federal and provincial governments to try and support this type of initiative. And overall, today we're looking at official planned land use policies. That's sort of the box that we have to draw around today in terms of what we're trying to work on and trying to look at and reflect on the policies that we currently have in place. Are they effective? And is there anything else that we can do with respect to land use policies that can help and promote more diverse housing and more affordable housing? So that's what we'll try to get to today. So I don't think my presentation will be too long. I think there will be ample time for breakout discussion to discuss affordable housing issues, and we're hopeful to get some good feedback that we can then incorporate into future planning for the town. So next slide, please, Katie. So just a reminder of what an official plan is. You know, it's serving as a roadmap. We're looking 25 years out from now to try and come up with a overall plan for the town, and what would that look like. We're trying to understand the community needs. We'll get public input from the town in terms of what we need in terms of jobs, in terms of housing, in terms of future land uses, and what can we do. And it's high level land use policies. So for example, we might have something in our official plan that says we will have green space and we will have parkland with future subdivisions. And then in a zoning bylaw or an additional bylaw for the town, we would have something else to further support that policy. So for example, sticking to parklands, in 2020, the town passed a parkland dedication bylaw that says any new development is required to have 5% of those lands be dedicated for parkland. So that's an example of the official plan policy was broad and high level, but then the town can then further support that high level official plan policy with something more specific. And so that's what we're trying to achieve with official plan policy, is this high level policy and direction that with what its overall vision for the town, and and it's specific to land use and what can we do with the land, either existing land base or future land. And we can even go as far as trying to plan out where the future communities are, what the densities of our population can be in different land uses, and where parks and other services will go. Next slide, please. So yes, there's tremendous variation in affordable housing definitions. So here's one here that we could consider, is that affordable housing is considered to be housing that costs less than 30% of your household's income. So for example, on that note, the median income for the town of Perth is $54,000 for a household income. That's from our 2016 census data. And so if you work that out in terms of what would 30% of that be, that would be an average monthly rent of $1,350 per month. And so, yes, we get feedback from different groups saying that that still isn't affordable for a large demographic, and that's obviously a lot that we have to work with. And so the town is working with the county and the province to try and figure out solutions on the different parts of the housing continuum, which we'll show in a future slide. So that's what we're working with. And then affordable housing is for rental housing, and it can also be for home ownership. And so those are the two examples that we're looking at, is there enough rentals, and what's the price for rentals, and then what about home ownership? And I think housing advocates will say that we need to also look at other definitions of housing, right? And look at more inclusive ways to promote different housing arrangements, whether it's cooperatives or land shares or co-housing, and try and come up with outside the box thinking, if you will, in terms of trying to come up with more ways to find housing for people. Next slide, please. So just that there's many different levels of government trying to work towards affordable housing. So the federal government has a national housing strategy that has capital funding allocated to programs across the country as well. So does the province. And so one initiative that the town could look at is to continue to approach the province in terms of trying to get additional funding for grants or to support additional housing in town. And then the county acts as the service manager who's responsible for administering a range of housing and homelessness programs. And so this can include shelter housing and social housing provided by the county. And then the town can also look at financial incentives and other types of policies for land use to see how we can support different types of housing, and specifically affordable housing. So it's a complex issue that different governments sectors are working on, and it's just trying to explain what the municipality's role is. So the town and other rural municipalities, we're limited with capital and funds, we're limited with staff resources. And it's a lot to put onto a municipality to try and promote and try to fund affordable housing initiatives. But I think with trying to develop appropriate policy and trying to seek funding from the province, as well as working with upper tier municipalities and not-for-profits, I think there is potential for small municipalities to continue to work on the affordable housing solutions. Next slide, please. So just a breakdown in terms of policy coming at the provincial, the county, and the town level. The province has the provincial policy statement and a long-term affordable housing strategy. So then they are working with the upper tier municipalities to discuss what affordable housing initiatives and policies can regional governments work on. The county has an official plan, as well as they're the ones that come up with a homelessness and housing action plan, which we will dig into some of those figures from the most recent plan in the next few slides. And then the town of Perth and other municipalities can have official plan policies in their secondary plan or in their zoning bylaw to try and encourage a range of housing types, and again, trying to support affordable housing, depending, of course, on the size of the municipality. Next slide, please. So here's this housing continuum that I was referring to. From my understanding, not-for-profits such as Cornerstone Landing and Interval House work on homeless, emergency shelters, and transitional housing. The county works on this area as well as the social housing component. Municipalities can work on more of the affordable rental housing and home ownership policies, and that's sort of that. And so I think it's easy to get confused with the different aspects of what is affordable and who is the target market in terms of what is affordable, what type of incomes or household incomes are we talking about. And the city of Kelowna has rearranged this continuum. Instead of making it linear, they made it circular to say that not necessarily is someone necessarily looking for home ownership. That may not be the end goal in terms of what this continuum looks like here. It's trying to be more inclusive, that everyone has different decisions in their life or different circumstances, and that people might just be looking for affordable rental housing, and that might be their end goal, and be happy with that. It's sort of to move away from the idea of that everybody wants to own a house, right? So there's lots of options out there, and it's the goal is to be able to provide that housing to as many people as possible. Next slide, please. So just to provide a bit of a landscape of what is the issue on the ground, and what do we see, and why are we considering that this, how have we declared this an affordable housing crisis across the country, and how do we see this here locally, and what are we trying to achieve from this? So from that homelessness and housing plan from Lanark County, it's from 2019, it shows that close to 700 people are on a waiting list for rent to geared income, which is, my understanding is for social housing. But the idea is that there's people on a waiting list in the county, over 600 of them, close to 700, looking for this type of housing. And one-bedroom apartments are the highest demand out of the selection process that people are looking for housing options. And again, in the next few slides, we'll go through some of that social housing demographic data that the county has. But in terms of demographics, the question is, what's going on in the town of Perth? And one aspect is that the number of people over 65 is double compared to the provincial average. So we have close to 40% of the population versus 18% as the provincial average. So that's something to consider. Of what is people over 65, what type of housing are they looking for? Do they have too much house? Do they not have enough house? What exactly are they looking for? And then concerning still is that moving forward in the next 20 years, the population of people over 65 in Lanark County is going to increase by 44%. So now all of a sudden we have even further demands moving forward in terms of providing services and providing housing options to people over 65. So if that's the case, then we need to consider what type of housing and other services do we need for a seniors population. And then on an even bigger picture is we need to provide services for this demographic, and then provide housing for people in those jobs that are providing that servicing. So people who make up part of the workforce, that's going to be people in the next 10 to 20 years, that will be people between the ages of 20 to 40 with small families or young families, maintaining the majority of the jobs in town, supporting an aging demographic who may need a diversity of housing options. Next slide, please. So here's an example from the Lanark County Homelessness Study. So RGI stands for this rent to geared income, where they facilitate social housing and sheltered accommodations for people. So this number is 690, and this list is up 10% from 2018 to 2019. I suspect it's likely higher due to the pandemic and any employment uncertainty people have felt in the last year and a half. We do have a 2021 census that's currently underway, so we will have updated information soon or in the next year or so from the county in terms of how maybe this number has changed, but it just paints the picture on the landscape that there's 700 people in the county looking for social housing. Next slide, please. And I mentioned this high demand for one-bedroom apartments. So on this is a wait list. There's 482 people on a waiting list for one-bedroom apartments in the county. It's a little bit more mixed with other housing options, but I thought this was an interesting statistic. So if you consider that for social housing, people are in need of one-bedroom apartments. In the town of Perth, we also have a local college where we have students also in need of likely one-bedroom or bachelor apartments. We have an aging demographic that would likely like to downsize and have additional housing options. And we also have a workforce in the coming years that would like, affordable housing that may also mean one-bedroom bachelor or two-bedroom apartments so that they're able to afford their rent. So it's an interesting statistic there. Next slide, please. So this is the wait list again, based on the different municipality. So the wait list for housing in Carleton Place, Smith Falls, and Perth is about just under a year in terms of a wait list. So again, do we have what is, it's sort of an invisible issue that we see, but here, this is the statistics that's showing us that there's people in need of social housing or sheltered accommodations. And this is the type of need and this is the type of need that they have, and this is the type of wait list that we have. So there's definitely a need for municipalities and the county to work on solutions to try and provide more affordable housing. Next slide. And then this is the wait time. So someone applying to the county saying, hi, I'm in need of some social housing supports. Can you put me on a list? Here's my application. And then shockingly as it is, it's over 2,700 days for someone to find housing accommodations in Carleton Place and 676 days in the town of Perth. So again, that's a lot of people on a wait list and quite a long duration for people. And we don't know, what their current circumstances or what their housing requirements currently are or where they find themselves, but, a pretty substantial wait list. And so, again, this just paints a picture of what this broad issue is and where we could move towards in terms of trying to find solutions. Next slide, please. So then specifically, what is the issue that we're trying to deal with for the town? And the simplest way to kind of articulate this is the fact that 55% of renter households were identified in that 2016 census data as paying excess of 30% of their gross income on housing. So that's an example right there. 1 out of 2 people that that are renting are paying technically too much for their housing. And so yes, it's a complicated issue. It's related to federal policies, the inflation rate, the interest rates, mortgage rates, and people leveraging to purchase homes and possible speculation from a wide variety of factors. So it's a complex problem. And furthermore, municipalities, we have this housing boom in place. So municipalities struggle to find staff resources to address affordable housing issues when staff are dedicated to a large pile of development applications coming forward. So it's a bit of a strange juxtaposition we find ourselves in: a high demand for housing, huge amount of growth in a lot of municipalities, yet unaffordable housing for a lot of people. So it puts a lot of strain on municipalities and regional governments to try and support affordable housing, and trying to balance all of these balls in the air in terms of different factors at play. And again, we likely suspect that with the information coming out from the 2021 census data, we suspect that it'll likely be a higher number than just 55% of renters with this, unaffordability issue. So back in 2020, in terms of what the town could do, staff provided a report on different planning tools that the town could look at in terms of trying to address affordable housing issues. And I just wanted to provide some updates on the progress that the town has made. The first one was a zoning bylaw amendment. And this was from a 2019 provincial act called the More Homes, More Choices Act, where the province said you can now allow a tiny home in the rear yard and an additional unit to the main house, effectively allowing 3 dwelling units on any residential parcel of land in the province. It's a huge policy change, but it's the direction from the province to try and promote infill and intensification, as well as affordable housing options. So the town went ahead and updated the zoning in late 2020 to allow both that additional unit to the house and the tiny home in the rear yard. Second, the town could look at, during an official plan amendment or review, to look at our affordable housing policies and see if there's any way for us to make improvements, which is what we're doing today. 3, we could look at a community benefits charge study, which the town has in the budget for this year to undertake. It primarily focuses on providing social benefits such as parkland or affordable housing, but it's specifically for 5 stories or higher development. So that could happen in the town. I've gotten advice from a lawyer to discuss whether the town should implement this, and the advice was that the town could someday look at supporting units taller than 5 stories, and then this is where this community benefits charge would come into play. Number 4 is development charges. So the municipalities charge a fee at the building permit stage when a house is being built to allow for the help to assist with funding of the capital costs of infrastructure that goes into building subdivisions and new houses. And so just this past month in September, the town waived development charges for additional units and tiny homes for new development. And that was a result of the COVID Emergency Measures Act in 2020, allowing for that change. So that's, again, just the town trying to follow the changing legislation from the province and saying, here's what we can do, small baby steps to try and support affordable housing. So if we do have a developer wanting to build a subdivision and they were interested or wanting to build a tiny home or additional units onto the main home, then the development charges would be exempt for those additional units. Another option would be a community improvement plan. The town currently has a community improvement plan. It's a planning tool under the Planning Act that a municipality can administer. And currently it's used for facade improvements for downtown businesses. We recently expanded that for businesses along Highway 7 to make other fast facade and other types of benefits for small business. The town could look at adding a separate community improvement plan for affordable housing to provide additional incentives, grants, or loans, or tax incremental funding is what it's called, for existing homes to support affordable housing initiatives. Another option was looking at inclusionary zoning. The town hired a national level housing expert to look at inclusionary zoning. Overall, the consultant felt like the town was a bit too small to try and accommodate inclusionary zoning, which is basically just saying that you are required to have affordable housing, such as 10% or 20%, and that would be in your zoning bylaw. So if anybody was to move forward with an apartment building, it would be a requirement in the town zoning to say you must have 20% affordable housing units and follow that definition. that consultant did say if the town did see unprecedented and significant future growth, then it could be something to revisit. And we'll get into that later, but it could be something the town could revisit whenever we're looking at rezoning lands to R4 or the town's highest density. And then finally, in terms of planning tools, the town could look at grants or other innovative ideas that are coming from other municipalities. And from there, what came out of this report and this list of planning tools was an affordable housing grant, which the town proceeded with, which is a $5,000 grant to anyone who wants to build an additional unit to their house or a tiny home. And we'll get into that one in a little more detail in a few more slides. So just to say that the town has taken on quite a few initiatives in terms of planning tools to try and proceed with these types of initiatives. This was just a summary of that development charges bylaw amendment that I mentioned back that we just updated back in September of 2021. Next slide, please. And so this is just a summary on the inclusionary zoning. The consultant was hired. He determined that there was insufficient development to warrant inclusionary zoning provisions at this time, and that he actually recommended promoting the additional dwelling units as a new policy tool that's come out by the province, and that we could revisit inclusionary zoning if development pressure increases. Next slide, please. And then here's a good example. I wanted to spend a little bit of time here. This comes from his report. I thought it was quite interesting. And so case one on the left is a proposal for 27 apartment units, and it would have 2 affordable housing units. And so the lost revenue over the 10 years for that developer to offer the 2 affordable housing units over that time would be $118,000. And so for the town to relieve or offset those costs of the developer, the town would have to refund development charges would be the main fee that the town would collect during this apartment building. They would have to refund the development charges fees or find another mechanism to find the $118,000 to recover the costs. So in that example, 27 units, there isn't sufficient development charges being charged on the entire property to offset the costs for 27 units. For case 2, similar example, but at least the development charges pays for what the offset would be. So for example, in case 2, it's a 57 unit apartment, and we're assuming 5 affordable housing units are created with this new development. And again, over a 10-year period, there'd be a reduction in the rental price of those units over those 10 years. And that would translate to a lost revenue of over $300,000 to the developer over that 10-year period. So as a result, the town would have to consider how to offset that loss. The developer otherwise isn't going to build these affordable housing units without some kind of offset. So the town would have to look for that $300,000, and it really comes down to the town would have to find that $300,000 by a reduction of development charges or by seeking funding from the province and say, hey, could we get $1 million? We're going to use $1 million from the province, and we're going to offset 3 large apartment buildings by $1 million and pay that money to a developer to allow for approximately 15 to 20 affordable housing units would be an example. So in terms of that $300,000 divided by those 5 affordable housing units, you're looking at a cost of $6,000 per unit per year. And over that 10-year period, it would cost the municipality in terms of deferred revenue, such as development charges, $60,000 per unit. So for a small municipality to find $300,000 in terms of coming out of our development charges fund or reserve, is pretty steep, and there needs to be a way for a town of this size to find a better option or to fund additional units that can be affordable for a lower cost than $60,000 over a 10-year period. I want to also add on this slide that both these examples are apartment buildings in the town of Perth where the zoning already allows for the apartment building. And so where this idea of inclusionary zoning comes to play is when you have a zone in town that's not our highest residential density, R4. It could be R1. It could be a whole different land use altogether, such as commercial or industrial. And so the way that our consultant explains it for this inclusionary zoning study is to say that if the municipality is the gatekeeper of zoning changes and the controller of land value in the town. So a developer approaches the town through a zoning bylaw amendment, is what it's called. It's an application, and through a public process where our planning committee hosts a public meeting and the developer or the applicant asks for a zoning change that says, I would like to increase the zoning density on this land from R1, which permits single family homes, to R4 for an apartment building. Our consultant explains that that's called uplift value, because now the value of the land is much higher because the town or the municipality allowed that zoning increase. And now all of a sudden, just like that in one application, the value of that land is that much greater. And so therefore, the consultant explains that that's how the inclusionary zoning works. Now you have this uplift value of the land value, and it's called he calls it the pie is now bigger. And so the municipality can ask for a piece of that bigger piece of pie by saying, we will allow you to have R4 zoning, but we will require 10, 15, 20% of your apartment units to be affordable housing. And that way, compared to this example where the town is looking for $300,000, it's the way to fund it's a funding mechanism to allow for that affordable housing. So that could happen in any greenfield or new development in town, and it could happen in any existing parts of town where the land isn't already R4. If you had a chance to read his report, he goes on to say that a lot of the town is already zoned R4, which means that if a developer was to buy that land, the land value, the value of building the apartment is already baked into the land value price. So if the whole town was zoned R1, which is single family homes, and there was lots of that land available, then the consultant would say there's great potential to have this zoning uplift and change the land to R4, and then that would fund this incentive program. But in this example, we're looking for this $300,000 in these two cases. The land was already zoned R4. The developer already paid the land value because the land was already zoned the R4. So it just explains that if the zoning is already R4, it's going to be challenging for the town to find finances to offset the loss to the developer to allow for affordable housing. So it's something that we can look at, but this just shows the mathematics in terms of what the developer is looking at and what the town would have to offset in terms of fees. And so if the town is looking for different types of options for affordable housing, then we have existing houses in town where we can either allow for additional dwellings. And again, that can be a new construction in terms of addition to the home. It could be a basement apartment. It could be an attic apartment or a separate apartment in the house. And it can also be a tiny home in the rear yard. We could look at offsetting in this example when we have a new apartment being built on R4 land. And then another option is to look at inclusionary zoning when we're looking at uplifting a zone up to the R4. So I hope that making the pie bigger, yes. So I hope that explains sort of the economics behind why isn't affordable housing happening and what is the dollar values that the municipality is looking at to try and create affordable housing. Next slide, please. So this is just some more on the inclusionary zoning aspect. And so just some language from the consultant. He basically says that an inclusionary zoning bylaw could be designed and implemented in the event that growth and larger scale rezonings and subdivisions materialize to generate that land value uplift that I was saying. He's saying if you are expecting significant development and growth with subdivision applications in the town and more apartments, that's something that we could consider. And he also explains that if we have a bylaw, and I'll backtrack for a second here. In our official plan currently, our official plan says that we will have 25% of all new development be affordable housing. And unfortunately, we have no teeth in our official plan to make that happen. We can ask a developer to put in 25% affordable housing, but they say no. And that's what the inclusionary zoning would do. It would allow teeth to an official plan policy and say, not only does the town of Perth say that they would like to have affordable housing in their official plan, but they also have the teeth in their zoning that requires it. But the town, according to our consultant, is a bit too small at the moment to try and generate that through a specific zoning policy. But it's something that larger municipalities are currently doing that we could look towards possibly in the future. Next slide, please. And then here is our details on our secondary unit grant program. So council approved $50,000 in 2021, and it's a $5,000 grant to be awarded for a project when someone's building an addition to their house or a tiny home in the backyard. We kept it strictly to new construction in case someone had a basement apartment already ready to go and they were just trying to get the $5,000 grant. We wanted to try and create a level playing field with applicants. And we also put in quite a few, relatively strict requirements. We said that the homeowner had to reside on the property, and we also wanted to limit. We didn't want applications to provide for short-term accommodations, so Airbnb and other rental accommodations. What we're trying to achieve is long-term affordable rental options. We unfortunately haven't had any uptake of our grant program. We're busy trying to get an educational piece up on our website, and quite possibly $5,000 may not be enough to fund additional units. With our current prices of lumber, $5,000 may have not even paid for the lumber to build an addition to your house or to your tiny home, right? I think larger municipalities in the Greater Toronto area, such as Richmond Hill, I want to say Vaughan, they're upwards of $20,000 to $30,000 grant program to fund affordable housing options for existing residential buildings. And the one item that we didn't have on this grant program currently that we could look at more with maybe other types of incentive programs is that we didn't put in an affordable housing rental rate. We felt like we already had quite a few restrictions. People had to reside on the property. It couldn't be for short-term accommodations. It had to be new construction. And if we limited the rent, or we capped the rent on these units, we felt like that was maybe going too far at this time, but it's definitely something that we could reconsider in the future, especially if we got something that we could do is ask for provincial funding, increase the grant program here, and then maybe we would say as part of that is that now we have $15,000 thanks to funding from the province, but we're going to cap your rent at a certain rate for a 10-year or 20-year period, for example. Next slide, please. So our concerns from our staff level in terms of the secondary grant program is that it needs to be efficient, and we're concerned that it makes a lot of sense coming from the province that we would like to have people do additions to the houses, maybe more units in your house, maybe even a tiny home in your backyard, with that one definitely being a major land use policy change, was having someone live in your backyard. We're aware that the neighbors might have issues with that, but the general consensus is that small, subtle changes of density in a neighborhood that's allowing for more housing options, as opposed to trying to buy some land out in the middle of nowhere and trying to promote, affordable housing on a vacant piece of land. So, or in greenfield. So what I'm trying to say there is we have existing houses with large lots. We already have the infrastructure in place. It's efficient and makes good use of the town's resources in terms of trying to increase density in a small way. The question is, how do we get the uptake? I think to some degree uptake has been slow in the town of Perth, because ultimately, I'll rephrase, in the town of Perth, we happen to have the highest number of residents who have paid off their mortgage. So we effectively have a retirement community who are house rich and likely don't have a need to build a rental suite or a tiny home in their backyard because they don't have to. Likely the demographic that we're looking to promote these units would be anyone between the ages of 20 and 40, or thinking they'd like to build something and help with their mortgage payments, for example. So we suspect that's maybe part of the reason why we're not getting the uptake that we would like. And then furthermore, the average homeowner isn't a developer and isn't going to know a lot about the details of the planning process, zoning requirements, and the building code, and how the municipal review process works. So we're quite adamant that we need a really, really cutting edge educational piece on our website to try and break it down for people and say, hey, we'd like you to build an addition to your house. This is what you need to do. These are the steps that we're going to take. And this is what the town can commit to in terms of a review process to try and help to allow for these units to be built. There's a relatively low return on investment for both the applicant and the municipality. You know, we're not going to have experienced land developers coming to town to build tiny homes. It's going to be individual landowners that are going to need a lot of hand-holding from municipal staff to try and get them through the process. So again, we are working on having PDF fillable forms and have the information on our webpage so that people can understand what the requirements are. And this idea of the tiny home in the backyard is a major land use policy change by having people live in someone else's backyard. It doesn't cause a severance of the property. The homeowner or the owner of the overall land would maintain ownership of both the house and the tiny home. And there would be no way to sever that into separate ownership, but it could create more rental opportunities for people. And then finally, as a result of one public meeting that the town had, we felt that it was important when it comes to people applying to build a tiny home that it follows a site plan application process to the town. That is a technical review by town staff by looking at setbacks, the layout of the tiny home, parking, garbage and waste collection, and to make sure that it's going to work. And we can also incorporate, you know, any concerns from the neighbors and what have you, and also look at landscaping and privacy as well. That extra level, we feel, and as well, it also has final approval from council. So we feel like that extra step for tiny homes allows for well-designed and well-planned a tiny home in someone's backyard. Next slide, please.
So while we're on the subject, Brad, if you could address what Glenn is saying with the $5,000 grant program, could it be extended to institutional and commercial building conversions, such as places of worship and upper stories of commercial buildings?
That's great. That's a great question. We haven't had any applications like that. We'd have to double check if our grant program is specific for residential land only. But we do have a caveat in our grant program that any proposal that deviates from our steps, we could bring that to council and have council review other applications.
It also brings up what Shannon was discussing earlier with that a few people would want to live in a tiny home. So also something else to be discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing is looking into the future. If we have an aging demographic, is a tiny home something that they want to live in? Maybe it's only a small percentage of the population that's interested in a tiny home. While it's a relatively new land use policy from the province, there's obviously carriage houses in Ottawa. There's, I think, laneway homes in Toronto. Maybe, a different demographic in downtown Toronto than downtown Perth in terms of wanting to live in the downtown area or for walkability. But it's there as an option. But yeah, the question really does become who would want to live in these units, and is it addressing our bigger issues that the town has in terms of what the needs are. The definition of tiny, the largest tiny home that you can have in a rear yard in the town of Perth based on zoning, it comes down to the percentage. I believe it's 25% of this growth of the ground floor area of the main house to a maximum of 720 square feet, which according to our chief building official is no longer tiny. You're now into a small home. So yes, tiny to small homes. And the minimum requirement for a tiny home is 197 square feet based on the building code. You can't put someone in a house smaller than 197 square feet. So that's the range that we're working with.
I think Andy is offering some services here. He would be happy to assist with development of educational materials.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, looks like let's continue and we can come back to some of the questions after.
So here's 2 slides on what the current policy says in our official plan. So one is that we're going to work with local housing authorities to monitor and assess the need for social assisted housing. I'm not sure how that's land use policy per se, but it's good that it's there. The town's obviously trying to work with different groups as best we can. 2 says ensure creation of affordable housing when approving new residential development and redevelopment to meet targets of 25% of all new rental housing. What we're seeing is that as in the inclusionary zoning report, if you haven't read it, please ask us for it. It's a great report. Basically, our consultant says that's called market failure when we have a policy in place to provide for affordable housing and it's not achieved. So it's part of the reason why we're here today is that this town, as well as other municipalities, have this policy in place that says new development will have 25% affordable housing. The question now is, why aren't we achieving that? And how do we get more teeth, or how do we get voluntary compliance with new development to try and get some more affordable housing options on the table? 3 is requiring applicants for new residential development to pre-consult and discuss opportunities for affordable housing. Again, our inclusionary zoning consultant would say they're just the market forces and the market dynamics that we currently have. We have new homes being built that are, the target market is retired seniors from Toronto or Vancouver, and we have apartment buildings being built that are geared towards seniors from Toronto and Vancouver. So it's becoming a upper end town, and we have to figure out how can we come up with policies to get more diverse housing options for both plans of subdivision as well as for apartments. And then next slide was the other 3 policies that we have. And so as it currently reads in our official plan is that the town would require an applicant to prepare an affordable housing market evaluation report for large subdivisions and large housing projects to explain, you know, how does their development address affordable housing. And the town is, number 5 is the town is going to prioritize applications from nonprofit housing corporations and housing cooperatives. So how do we get more of them looking for land or acquiring land? And then 6 is that the town, if the town has residential lands that are declared surplus, it would be given priority sale for the development of affordable housing. So the town does have some residential lands, then what would be the steps towards, you know, making that happen? And then 7 is whenever possible, the town participates in programs delivered by senior levels of government. The town is always seeking, trying to obtain funding from the province. Obviously, it comes down to staff capacity and our ability to look for funding. And you know, there's 400 municipalities in this province. It's difficult to be the one that gets the funding from the province. And then finally, the town will encourage partnerships among public, private, and institutional organizations. So again, we have some good policy here, but how do we get more affordable housing? After a review of these policies, specifically that 25% requirement, it's not being achieved currently when we have development proposals coming to town. How do we do that? So next slide, please. So after a review of other official plans, we did see that some municipalities require development standards for residential intensification. And the idea is that if a developer is retrofitting or doing an infill development, then they can follow specific guidelines set out by a municipality to use materials that are going to minimize the cost of housing. So, you know, do we have a developer wanting to build an apartment with marble countertops or granite countertops, or how do we convince them to use maybe not the high-end finishings to try and promote somewhat more affordable housing options? And then this next one is what I was referring to earlier, this idea of that for greenfield development or any existing development in town, when we're trying to increase the zoning to R4, there may be an opportunity for us to look at this a minimum 10% affordable housing when there's this uplift value of zoning. And the town has done quite a bit in terms of developing and initiating this affordable housing grant program. The town should continue to try and promote it and get more educational materials out to the community and work on social media as well. And hopefully we can get a couple of projects under our belt soon, and then we'll be able to showcase those to the community in terms of how well these projects are working. Next slide, please. And again, sort of that case study that I showed, we have a few development applications coming to town where it's a 12-unit apartment building or a 15-unit apartment building. And in those examples, we illustrate that the amount of offsetting that the municipality would need to do isn't sufficient in terms of what we're collecting, and the development is of such a small scale. So therefore, we should consider looking at a minimum is a 50 dwelling unit, either for a subdivision or for an apartment building, where we need to either require affordable housing or work with the developer on a voluntary basis to determine how can we best go about funding mechanisms to support affordable housing. We can use more planning and more land use planning on our greenfield lands to try and identify affordable housing sites. And as part of our pre-consultation meetings, the town passed a pre-consultation bylaw in 2020 that requires development applications meet with the town before submitting a planning application. And that during that stage, the town can try and explain, prioritizing rental apartment buildings. For example, if in the example of a developer is coming from Toronto and wants to buy land in the town of Perth, then the direction to staff from council from this official plan would say, hey, we're really in need of rental apartment units. And so finally, building on that case, again, not confusing the homelessness and housing report from Lanark County, but just trying to illustrate that that housing need of 60% of the housing need being for 1-bedroom apartments for social housing. Let's use that as a surrogate number for when we're trying to direct and plan for apartment buildings for the rest of the town, that it seems quite urgent that we should be supporting 1-bedroom apartment building or 1-bedroom units, for example. That could be a tiny home or additional dwelling unit, or it could be an apartment. It seems like that is a serious need for the town. And next slide, please. And then finally, here's some other potential activities, not necessarily official planned land use policy, but what else tools can the municipality employ to try and support it? We could come up with a community improvement plan and try and get affordable housing as an eligible project as a community improvement plan, and allow for grants and loans and tax incentives for more of our existing housing stock to support affordable housing. We can reduce our planning and building fees to further support applications that are coming in from local citizens trying to build an additional unit. The town could also look at, again, building off of the official plan policy, find and partner with not-for-profits and other organizations to support more affordable housing programs. And this tax incentive program comes as part of that community improvement plan, is that if someone builds an addition to their house, the municipality can waive the increased taxes on the addition to the house to support the construction of that house. And finally, we can continue to look at grants or other innovative ways for people to renovate their properties and to see how we can house more people in an efficient manner. So I hope that provides some background. I hope that wasn't too detailed, but I wanted to give you some of our perspective, at least from my desk, about what housing policies we have currently in our official plan, what are the tools that a municipality can use, and trying to frame it in our discussion of specifically what a municipality can do in terms of official plan policies. So I hope you understood some of those aspects that we're trying to get to. And if you haven't done so already, then I'd encourage you to check out the Lanark County's 2019 Homelessness and Housing Report, as well as the town's Inclusionary Zoning Report, which provides more breakdown of some of the ways that the town can promote affordable housing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad. That was a great presentation, I think, with just enough detail for us to sink our teeth into the issues and understand more about what's going on. So I would like to open the floor to discussion and questions, and I'll scroll back up. There have been some great comments and some great questions. And please feel free to unmute and ask if that question is still alive and if it's still something that you want to address. So, and I do see the town of Perth has raised their hand. Would you like to go ahead and ask our first question? Leona, I think you have your hand raised.
And Allison, you're on mute there.
She asked me to speak, didn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah,
As
go ahead.
chair, I'm just making that
Okay, no.
comment. A lot of people have made very useful comments in addition to asking questions. And I want to be able to get through them and make sure that we pick up on those tips that have come from people like Glenn Tunnock and Andy Coburn and so on. Go ahead.
Okay. I did mention this in council. The presentation was informative. But I think we can talk till the cows come home if we don't really settle on what affordable housing is. I think it's still not clear to a lot of people, even though Brad did outline it the first. The slide you used that showed what the municipal is responsible for and what the county's responsible for, I thought was, to me, the best slide. We're not responsible for the social services end of it. And I don't mean to sound harsh when I'm saying that, but that is the county's. And so talking about, this is my opinion then, talking about affordable housing, if you're going to be talking about for people who need assistance or really low income, that's not our job. Not that I don't have feeling for them, but that is the county's job. And so spending a town like Perth or any other small town, we don't have the income to deal with that, nor is it our responsibility. And so I think we really have to, before we do anything, have a specific idea of affordable. Brad gave us the definition at the beginning. And some people say, one definition I read was it's just less than the market value. So if we're talking just about the people that he had in that slide, then tiny houses don't even enter into it, our discussion. I mean, we can talk about them if we want to later, but we have to look at townhouses and apartments, not putting units in the apartment that are for social services. I don't think that's what our mandate is at the municipal level. That's at the county level. So I think we have to be very clear on what we're saying when we say affordable housing and not get confused with what the county has, because a tiny house, I'm not against them, but to me, that's more like social housing than actually solving anybody's problem.
Well, can we go through the rest of the questions? I want to cover
Thank
off
you.
some of the points that were made because it's really useful information.
And I appreciate coming back to the jurisdiction of the town of Perth and what the responsibilities are versus what the responsibilities of the province, of the county, et cetera. So thank you for bringing that back. Brad, was there anything you wanted to say before I start going through some of what was in the chat?
Yeah, like one question I saw was that said, who wants to live in something that's the size of a garden shed? These units in the backyards are not that small. They're, as has just been said, they're like 700 square feet. But I want to pick up on the points that like Glenn Tunnock made and Andy Coburn. We have people here with tons of information and they've keyed it in as we went, but you couldn't see all of it because of the size of the comment box. So can we go through some of those?
Sure. So I'll start with Ramsey. Is the town required legally to offset costs of inclusionary zoning? It would be instructive to show the value of lost revenue compared to the total revenues for the developer in the two case examples. Ramsey, was there anything else you wanted to say?
Just in terms of the request to see the the actual revenue generated, 300,000 seems like an awful lot of money, but that's a percent of the total revenue that a developer would make. And I guess what I'm getting at is it wouldn't necessarily be popular with the development community. I certainly appreciate that, but is there an ability to just make this the price to play? If you're going to do development in Perth, can you say, you have to have some degree, or you have to make some contribution to affordable housing? But, and that's whether it's a unit in your building, or do we do it like we do with green space? And if you don't have room within your development because you're only doing a few, then you make a contribution and we put that into a pool to support affordable housing elsewhere. And while I've got the mic, I guess I just also reiterate Liz's comments in the text, I think are really important, that at the end of the day, we need to look at sort of fairly significant investments in community housing and cooperative housing, as opposed to depending on the market. It's not going to get us there. All levels of governments, lower tier municipalities, the county, provincial and federal, have an important role to play in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramsey. Next, I'll invite Glenn. Glenn, if you wanted to speak a little bit more about what you were commenting on about inclusionary zoning costs, and then the grant program, and you had some other comments. So if you would like to unmute and let us know a little bit more.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Maybe I can show the video as well. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Certainly there is a significant gap between what the market might provide in terms of affordable housing and what the actual affordability is of individuals. And notwithstanding the councillor's comments, we are responsible as a municipality to facilitate the delivery. Our position as a planner is that the menu of options should be as wide as is possible. And Brad has certainly outlined a number of options that are addressed in the existing plan, as well as other potential options. But I think there are several issues, I guess, or several ways, I guess, in terms of providing affordable housing. One is certainly the issue of conversions. And I think the official plan policies can be more specific with respect to encouraging or facilitating conversions of institutional buildings, such as churches, it could be schools, it could be a government of the town. So I think there can also be conversions of existing housing stock. I think one point that was not raised today at all was the fact that we have a substantial underutilized housing stock within the town, individuals, and these are the types of units that could be converted through co-leasing, cooperative housing, and it may be beneficial for the town to consider a demonstration project, since the education of the public is one issue that was addressed. That means that the town could, through its grant program, through an incentive program, work with an individual property owner to demonstrate how an existing large single detached dwelling could be converted to provide for affordable housing. So I think there need to be policies in the plan that is housing stock in the town, and as we know, it's quite substantial. On the inclusionary zoning issue, yes, that's another issue of cost, and I do acknowledge the comments that were made by Brad and the expert. But what that fails to do is to look at or examine the upfront costs, the basic costs of land and of services. Inclusionary zoning could work where land that is municipal or government land can be released to provide for affordable housing. Rated into the equation, or they're very minimal obviously that's going to reduce the land development costs and therefore improve the revenue at the far end of the process. And the same goes for services as well, is that if you are looking at land that is already serviced, you're not looking at increased servicing costs. So that's part of the equation as well. So in terms of inclusionary zoning, I think you have to look at the front end costs and ways and means, if possible, of trying to reduce those particular costs. So I think I'll just end with one final comment, is that the broader the framework for providing affordable housing, I think the better off the incentives or the opportunities are for the delivery of affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Any comments or anything from you, Brad?
Oh no, those are good comments. We'll consider Glenn's comments on how we move forward.
Great. Yes, David.
It's just if I could ask a question, Brad or anybody else, just for my clarification. Given that it is a free market economy outside of rent to income based housing and social housing, has anybody got anything in mind, or are they the assumption that if a tiny house goes in, or as I think is more likely, an extension to an existing property as a separate unit, if that goes in, I know I've mentioned this before, but does anybody have any idea or concept that this will be of a certain level of rental? Because the free market, what I can see happen is what happened with all the bungalows in town. They've got swallowed up if you by the refugees from the cities, and I could see the same happening in these smaller units.
Yeah, so on that one, if the town was to proceed with affordable housing with a developer, for example, then an agreement would be put in place for 10 years or 20 years, and then a rental rate would be decided upon. Building on your question, Tracy Julian also had the same question that she submitted earlier. She asked, will you be requiring developers to disclose rental prices and asking prices when they bring forward a development proposal? And if they don't provide these figures, how will you be able to determine whether they're helping to fill the 25% target? So first and foremost, I think the question is, what are we defining as affordable housing? If we say 30% and we say the median income is $54,000, then we're looking at a rental rate of $1,350, which is arguably below the market currently. So is that something that we can achieve? And through an agreement with a developer, that would be sort of the mechanism that we would use to try and support affordable housing.
If we could go to Gail's question, were residential parking minimums discussed as part of the affordable housing planning tools?
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't looked at parking requirements. That is a whole other can of worms, but it's definitely something of interest, is to try and see how can we accommodate. Obviously, we have developers approach the town. They're always trying to maximize the developable area of a lot, and often some of the constraints will be parking. So the potential is to, if we reduced parking restrictions, then we could have more density for the developer, and there's potential to offset the parking space with affordable housing. But it's not something that we've looked into great detail now.
Thank you for the question, Gail. Anything else?
I wondered if you would ever consider something called unbundled parking. If someone is renting or buying a unit and they don't drive or don't have a car, then they don't need a parking space, and they're pretty expensive to build. And would that lower the cost of units, developer, if they just have to build a housing unit and not car storage, that would lower their cost.
Right.
Great point. Yeah, thank you, Gail. Good thing to consider. I see the town of Perth has a hand up again.
Take any more further questions? Can we make sure that we go through the ones that were asked in the chat, because some of them were longer and you couldn't read them all. So if we could ask people that pose those questions, we could deal with those before we take any others, because we have less than half an hour left.
So we will be moving to Andy next. So Andy was talking about an interesting discussion. Hi, Andy. You want to take it from here and fill us in a little bit more?
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andy Coburn. I'm a Perth resident. I'm formerly a teacher at Algonquin College in one of their home building programs. I'm since moved out to the private sector and am involved with a nonprofit called NAMA Canada. It's the National Association of Insulation Manufacturers. I'm also the president of the local Home Builders Association. Part of what I do is I make educational content that has to do with energy efficiency, renovations, retrofits, new construction, mostly practically oriented, and it's all free. I put a link to some of the training that I've made, and I would be happy to lend my services for free to build educational content for the town or the county. I know that this is a national problem. I speak to people all across the country, if not across the world, who are dealing with the same thing. So people in the bigger centers all the way out to the smaller towns in Newfoundland and in northern parts of the prairies. And everyone is looking for ideas on how to do better housing, affordable housing, and housing that is going to work in the future. And that's something that we hang our hats on, where we're talking about energy efficient housing that has extremely low operational costs, which is excellent for public and social housing, so that occupants don't have to worry about paying $100, $200 a month to heat or cool. There are European examples of these types of buildings that cost $24 a year to heat and cool because they're built so well. I also made a comment about doing prefabricated MURBs, multi-unit residential buildings, just to overcome that energy efficiency problem, but also to go about building not just one tiny house in someone's driveway, but building 20 and stacking them as a multi-unit apartment building. There's a lot of really good ideas out there. I would be happy to participate and talk more about it to whoever's interested. No charge.
Excellent resource. Thank you, Andy. That's super useful, and thanks for your generosity. We have I think some of the links in the chat, so that's useful as well. Let me just go through. Shannon, did you have a question with regards to what Andy shared?
No, I wanted to comment on something that David was saying that I think he was getting at, but I'm not sure. You know, people might build these tiny homes and laneway houses and something over the garage, but you know what? I don't think they're going to be affordable units, because I think, you know, Bradley hit it when he said, well, you know, it could help them out with their mortgage. Well, if they can make $1,000 on the tiny home, or, you know, the suite above their garage, for God's sakes, they're going to do it. And I just have to speak from my own personal experience, where I was living in a place. The landlord decided he wanted more return on his investment, so he made it into a duplex. I lost half my space, and yet he wants the same amount of rent. Well, how does that work? You know, so now he wants to make it was close to $2,400 on what I mean, how can you do this? And this is happening, and it's happening. This is in Almont, and this was an illegal conversion. You know, just because we say, oh, you have to have a building permit, doesn't mean you have to get one. Because if you're doing something within your own, the house you own, you're converting it, it's all inside, isn't it? They're not seeing the scaffolding. And so they just go hog wild. The workman traipse in and out. Within 6 months, you've got a major construction redone with a tenant in situ. I lived through that. They had to put in a new bathroom, a new kitchen, everything. And it's in COVID times. So what I'm saying is, it's well and good to say, oh yeah, we can build a little house in our backyard and we'll make lots of money and we'll just put somebody living there who's desperate. Well, you know what? I'm desperate and I wouldn't live there. I wouldn't live there. The other thing that has come up on other housing lists that I'm party to, the people who will live there are street people. You'll get people off the street they'll be placed in your small garden home in the backyard. Drug addicts, alcoholics, people with murder raps, who knows? These are the kind of people that will live in those small houses. This is a given. It's not someone like me with a 5-ton truck and 3 cats and plants and furniture. I'm not moving there. So I just thought that's the reality of the situation. You're looking at my experience and what I'm experiencing, and I'm on every housing list there is, and I'm listening to what they're doing in Europe. In Europe, at least they're building proper places for people. They're building proper places. Check out what Ireland's doing. Here, we're just glossing over the problem. That's what we're doing. And so there's that's my piece for today.
Thank you, Shannon, and the realistic view of what's actually happening and your experience. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And sorry you had to go through that during COVID. That's yeah. Okay, so going back into our comments, we have a very lively discussion on chat today. So Liz was saying that we might just only be scratching the surface with individual homes. And she talked about municipal surplus lands combined with a nonprofit housing developer. There are a number of new nonprofit developers. Was there anyone who wanted to comment on that? I know Liz doesn't seem to be with us anymore. I think someone also asked about the surplus land and what that is.
So we have recently compiled a list of all surplus lands, development lands in the town of Perth. It's a list. It's not on a map, but that is available.
Okay, so there is land that exists and there is a resource available. Okay. Ramsey asked about Silversmith property, which seems to be more or less abandoned. Anyone know anything about that one?
It is being used and it is being paid. And that's about all we can say on that.
Okay. Brian says the city of Ottawa and maybe Kingston are using bonus floors and as an incentive for builders. Is that anything that?
Yes, that's called density bonusing. And so we currently have that in our official plan already, where if you are going to provide affordable housing, then the council will consider an additional floor for your development, for example. However, that density bonusing provision is being removed by the province for in favor of that community benefits charge that I mentioned previously. So we could still do it for the next 2 years, but after that, we need to look at an additional study.
Great, thank you. Okay, catching up on the chat here. Okay, so Bradley, you answered the size.
Okay, Tracy Gillian had another question. Her question was about pre-consultation with developers with respect to affordable housing and what that process looks like. And like, is there a method for public input in terms of that discussion with a private developer, for example? I think the short answer is that we're not really having that discussion. Again, we're a small municipality and developers are saying that they can't really offset the costs of providing affordable housing. So the question then becomes, do we find funding for that offset? Do we reduce our development charges for that offset? What do we do? Or do we require it and say it's just the cost of doing business in the town of Perth? We could look at that as part of an inclusionary zoning bylaw, but except our consultant would say that bylaw has to be very finely adapted and approached so that you don't scare away developers either. And, you know, we've been saying all along that we want more housing. So we want to promote more housing, diversification of housing, and then affordable housing. So it's sort of a three-pronged effort to try and promote more housing. So it's a complicated issue, as everyone understands.
Ramsey had another comment about, I guess it was referring to the map of existing municipal lands, what I think Judy was just talking about, and meet with current nonprofit housing developers and those involved with cooperative housing development, which sounds like it would be more county level. Is that true?
The town can approach some not-for-profit housing cooperatives or what have you, or even a private developer to see if there's anyone interested in promoting more affordable housing. So that would be known as it could be known as a private, public-private partnership, or some kind of partnership, a collaboration between a municipality and a private organization. So there's definitely opportunities out there. Again, it comes down to staff capacity and finding the time and the resources to move forward with it. But it is definitely something that is on our list of things to do.
Excellent. Ramsey, did you have something else you wanted to say about that?
No, just thank you for both Judy mentioning the fact that a list has been compiled. I think the more accessible and more visual we can make that, the more we can put it out to the world and see who is out there. You know, there are provincial and national organizations promoting cooperative housing. Great example in Kingston that's being developed with the support of municipal lands being provided by the city of Kingston. Or we've got several nonprofit housing developers, all of which have, you know, in conversations expressed interest in seeing more housing. Whether or not they have the capacity to actually do it, you know, they need to find funding, but it's certainly, we need to be meeting and talking and pushing and having these conversations, or nothing will happen.
Absolutely. Brad, could you address Terry Stewart's comment?
I think I'll follow with them separately. I have to do some mathematics, I think, on that one. That's a great question.
Town of Perth, next. Another question.
Something that maybe could be useful too. We have high-end living for seniors, and we've been talking about the proportion of seniors in Perth. I mean, very high-end, and then there seems to be very low-end. And if there was something more in the middle, that I think that would be a solution to some housing things, because I think that there are a lot of seniors, there are a lot of bungalows. When I was campaigning, there were a lot of seniors living alone in their home, but they don't really want to take in a boarder or whatever, but they're living in homes that have 2 and 3 bedrooms empty, but you can't force people to take them in. But they don't want to spend the $5,000 or $6,000 a month of our high-end building that we have, but they don't want to be in the lowest end either. That if we had maybe a seniors only apartment place that's not geared to income, but was of a medium range, I think that would be a good thing for Perth to look at. Now, I don't know which level of government looks at doing something like that, and that might free up some of the many houses that are owned by a lot of the seniors living by themselves.
I don't think that you can, because of legislation,
No.
have something that's solely for seniors, because there was one in Smiths Falls and they had to change it so that anybody could rent there. So I don't think you can restrict it.
They have them in other towns, I know for a fact.
Well, maybe government just hasn't caught up with them yet, but I don't know. Brad might know more than me, but that's my understanding, that you can't restrict it to seniors only.
I don't know. I'd have to look into that one.
great point, and that's something that's definitely worth looking into. That's not assisted living, but it is for seniors. So, Linda.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for taking my question. It's been a very interesting discussion, and thank you, Bradley, for putting this together in such a comprehensive way. Every time I hear more and more about housing, affordable housing, homelessness, it just seems to get more and more complex and more dire what the needs are. So my hat's off to all of those of you who are trying to untangle this and make the situation better. I have one comment, and I'm hoping, Bradley, you will hear this and consider it in your planning, and so will the town of Perth. I think it's really imperative to protect our precious green spaces and to enhance them. And that would certainly put us in a direction of improving the quality of life as well in Perth. If we use up all of our green spaces to build all kinds of housing and stuff, I think we're all going to suffer because of that. So just to keep that in mind as the planning is going along. The second point that and listening to the discussion, it almost sounds like the town of Perth is going to become a senior housing development in a few years. Not just sections of it, but the whole town because of the population density of seniors. So while it's very important to plan for that, I just want to put a caution in not to have only or too many single bedroom units. I think and I hope that Perth will want to continue to attract young families to continue to the vibrancy of the town. And it's very important to build housing that will be able to attract young families as well. So I just wanted to put those 2 points in, that there's a need for not only medium range senior housing, but medium range housing for younger families. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So our time has now come to an end, and we have a lot of really great comments, and what a great participation today for this great topic. We will be soliciting more information from you via a survey that Allison will be putting together. So just if you have other thoughts that come up about this topic, please feel free to reach out and let us know. Any closing remarks, Brad? Go ahead.
Just to say that thank you for everyone for participating. We've got this recorded, so we'll make sure to see what we can get into the official plan in terms of these comments. Even if it's not official plan policy, I think we've got some good action items here in terms of community involvement and how maybe we can make some next steps for trying to tackle affordable housing. Our next meeting will be November 15th. And I believe our topic will be, let's review the first half of our official plan. I will say that now. And so that will be a review of what we've covered to date and some proposed official plan policies and changes that we're considering. And we will go from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in November.